Good day, welcome. This is your Daily Med with Lady V. Today we will talk about the blessings of the good land in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 7 through 9, and the verses 17 and 18. And we will see from the scriptures that Moses pled his case not only on the basis of what God has done for the children of Israel by taking them out of the wilderness, but on what he was about to do for them. The blessings that he was taking them to in the good land, the land of Canaan, that is detailed in our lesson today. In verse 7 through 9 of Exodus chapter 8, it tells us, it says, "For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks and of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey, a land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, that thou shalt not lack anything on it, a land whose stones are iron, and out of those hills thou mayest dig brass." So he vividly described to them the land, given in details as we can see, a land that is prosperous. But he also warned them that prosperity might lead to forgetfulness, and forgetfulness to disobedience. So what Moses was actually saying to the people, that God was saying to them, they were to watch against the perils of forgetfulness. And verse 10 all the way to verse 20 tells us what that is. He says, "When thou hast eaten and art full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he hath given thee." He says, "Beware that thou forget not his commandments and his judgments and his statutes which I command thee this day." He says, "Lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when thine herd and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt, and from the house of bondage." He says, "Who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint." He says, "Who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not of, that he might humble thee, and that he might prove thee to do thee good at thy latter end." He says, "And thou say in thine heart, my power and might, mine hand hath gotten me wealth. He says, but thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he who giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant with which he swore unto thy fathers, as it is this day. So we see in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 7 to 9, the blessings are described. How much God is going to prosper his people in the land of Canaan. But with the hope or the anticipation of these blessings, here comes the warning. Remember, when there is prosperity, there tend to be forgetfulness of who is the source. And then here comes disobedience, because now the laws of God are neglected. So in verse 10 through 20, he's saying to the people, watch against these things. Faithfulness on God's part must be met with corresponding faithfulness on the part of Israel, or on the part of his people, you and I today. God has been faithful to us. Then we must meet his faithfulness with our faithfulness by being true to him, by being obedient to him, by keeping his words. So here he was saying to Israel, God keeps his covenant with the patriarchs, the forefathers. In verse 18 he sees that, and the people needed to keep their word to God. In the book of Exodus 19 and verse 8, the people made God a promise. If the people forget God's mighty acts on their behalf and attribute their wealth to their own power, then God, Jehovah, would destroy them as he destroyed the Canaanites and the Hittites and all those other Gentile nations. So specifically in verses 17 and 18, after he took them through what happened in the wilderness, he says to them, if you begin in verse 17 to say in your heart that the goodness or the prosperity that you are now having came or happened because of what you did from your own hands, he's saying to them, this is where pride is conceived. And when pride comes forth in the final stage, guess what? It manifests in various different ways. It is the whole reason why God told them earlier in the scriptures in verse 1 through 6 that the wilderness wandering was a process. It was a process to make them humble. It was a process where they would feel hungry and he provide the manna. They would feel thirsty and he would provide the water. Other testings of drought and other nations who want to fight against them were some of the trials that they met. But all these things were to ground them and to keep them humbly serving their God. So we see that prosperity can cause one to fall into pride, and for one to go away, take the glory, take the fame, take the honor that I did this by myself, not remembering that it is God who is the source and God who continues to provide. In verse 18, it tells us that God is the one who gives the power to get wealth. So when one becomes wealthy, he or she does not just get wealthy because of the work of their own hands, but God who gives the power so that such one can become wealthy. It is not sinful in and of itself to be wealthy. It is the misuse of wealth. When wealth is used contrary to the law of the will of God, that is when it constitutes sin. And when pride fills the heart of men and women who have become wealthy and they forget God, that He is the source, the one who gave them the power to become wealthy. So today, the warning is given. Let us not become prosperous. Let us not be full and be forgetful. And in our forgetfulness, forget God and disobey His laws. God bless you. Thank you again for watching, and may God bless.